Close your eyes and imagine paradise. A lush, tropical island sitting in the absolute middle of the vast, endless Pacific Ocean. Crystal clear waters, rich soil, and absolute freedom from the crushing weight of modern society. Now, open your eyes and look closer, because true isolation isn't a sanctuary. It is a psychological pressure cooker. When you strip away laws, when you remove the watching eyes of civilization, the human animal does not ascend to a state of peace. It descends into its darkest, most primal state. What you are about to hear is not a myth. It is the blood-soaked history of Pitcairn Island, a microscopic rock in the ocean that became a slaughterhouse, a cult, and ultimately, a generational prison of unspeakable crimes. Welcome to the darkest social experiment in human history. Long before the Europeans ever set eyes on it, Pitcairn was a graveyard. In the 11th century, Polynesians discovered this volcanic rock. For a few centuries, they thrived. They built a society, mined obsidian, and traded with islands hundreds of miles away. But the psychological terror of Pitcairn is its finite nature. It is a biological cage. After 400 years, the resources began to run dry. The trees were cut down. The soil grew tired, with nowhere to run, and thousands of miles of deadly ocean in every direction. The Polynesians turned on each other. Hunger bred paranoia. Paranoia bred war. They slaughtered each other in brutal civil conflicts until not a single human soul was left breathing. For centuries, the island sat in dead, absolute silence, waiting for its next victims. In 1787, the British Empire inadvertently sent the island exactly what it was waiting for. The HMS Bounty, a British Royal Navy vessel, was dispatched to the Pacific. Their mission was simple: travel to the tropical islands, collect breadfruit plants, and bring them back to feed the empire's enslaved populations in the Caribbean. But the British Admiralty fundamentally misunderstood human psychology. When the freezing, brutalized, and exhausted sailors of the Bounty arrived in Tahiti, they didn't just find breadfruit. They found a psychological break from the sheer hell of the British Navy. They found warm weather, abundant food, and Tahitian women who welcomed them. For over 6 months, they lived like gods. But then, Captain William Bligh ordered them back onto the rotting wooden ship to face the brutal discipline of the sea. You cannot show a starving man a feast. Let him taste it, and then lock him back in a cage. The human mind will simply refuse the reality. The crew's resentment mutated into a violent mutiny. Led by Fletcher Christian, the mutineers seized the ship. They forced Captain Bligh and 18 loyalists into a tiny rowboat and abandoned them to die in the endless abyss of the Pacific Ocean. The mutineers had won their freedom, but freedom, bought with treason, comes with a terrifying paranoia. They knew the British Empire would hunt them to the ends of the earth. They could never return home. They needed a place so remote, so utterly forgotten by God and man, that the hangman's noose could never reach them. They remembered the legend of an uncharted, uninhabited rock, Pitcairn Island. In 1790, they arrived. The demographics of this new society were a mathematical guarantee of extreme violence. There were 9 British mutineers, including Fletcher Christian. They had brought with them 6 Tahitian men to act as their servants and 12 Tahitian women. 27 people trapped on a piece of land barely 2 miles across. Look at the horrific math of this society. 9 heavily armed, arrogant European men who viewed themselves as masters. 6 indigenous men stripped of their dignity and treated as beasts of burden. And 12 women, treated not as human beings, but as property to be divided. The 9 white men claimed 9 women for themselves. The remaining 3 women were forced to be shared among the 6 Tahitian men. It was a foundation built on systemic abuse, racial supremacy, and deep, festering sexual jealousy. It was a powder keg waiting for a single spark. That spark came in the form of liquid madness. A mutineer named William McCoy, desperate to escape the claustrophobia of the island, discovered how to distill a lethal, high-proof alcohol from the sweet roots of the native tea plant, the island quickly descended into a violent, drunken haze, the fragile facade of civilization violently fractured. One day, in a blind, alcohol-fueled rage, McCoy attacked his assigned Tahitian wife simply because she had failed to catch enough fish for his dinner. As a punishment, he brutally severed her ear. Trapped on an island with a violent alcoholic monster, the traumatized woman chose the only escape available to her. She climbed to the highest cliffs of Pitcairn and threw herself into the crushing waves below. Her suicide broke the precarious mathematical balance. McCoy was now without a woman. In his arrogant, drunken entitlement, he simply looked at the 3 women shared by the 6 Tahitian men and decided to take one for himself. This was the absolute breaking point. The Tahitian men, humiliated, abused, and pushed to the absolute edge of human endurance, realized that if they did not kill the white men, they would be hunted like animals. They secretly managed to steal muskets and ammunition. The rebellion was swift, silent, and soaked in blood. In a matter of hours, they hunted down the British mutineers. Fletcher Christian, the charismatic leader who had started the entire mutiny, was shot in the back and butchered. The island echoed with the screams of dying men, but the psychological horror of Pitcairn was far from over. The Tahitian men had won, but their victory was short-lived. The Tahitian women had watched the white men enslave them, but they also knew that the Tahitian men were just as capable of horrific violence. In a chilling twist of absolute survival, the women waited for the dark of night, while the 6 Tahitian men slept, believing they were finally the masters of the island. The women armed themselves. They crept into the sleeping quarters and slaughtered every single one of the Tahitian men in their beds. Let the sheer trauma of that event sink into your mind. Within a handful of years, a tropical paradise had turned into a literal graveyard. Of the original 15 men who arrived, only 4 British mutineers were left alive. Surrounded by 11 deeply traumatized women and a growing number of fatherless children, the madness consumed the survivors. McCoy, the violent alcoholic who had sparked the massacre, tied a heavy rock round his own neck and threw himself into the ocean, ending his miserable existence. Another mutineer, Matthew Quintal, completely lost his mind. He descended into a psychotic state, threatening to murder the women and the children. The last 2 remaining men, Ned Young and John Adams, realized that if Quintal lived, they would all die. In the dead of night, they crept up on their former friend and executed him with an axe to the skull. Shortly after, Ned Young died of a severe asthma attack. And then, there was only one, John Adams, the last man standing, a mutineer, a murderer, and now the absolute, undisputed king of Pitcairn Island, surrounded by a harem of 11 women and dozens of children, who had never seen another human being outside of this cursed rock. Total isolation breeds a very specific type of narcissism. John Adams began to experience what he called religious visions. He found an old Bible salvaged from the Bounty. He taught himself to read it, and he began to preach. He didn't just become their leader. He became their prophet, their God. He completely rewrote the history of the island. He forced the women and children into a strict, puritanical lifestyle. He outlawed alcohol. He dictated who could speak, what they could wear, and how they must pray. He created a deeply isolated, heavily indoctrinated cult, with himself as the absolute patriarchal center. When British ships finally rediscovered the island decades later, they were shocked. They expected to find bloodthirsty pirates. Instead, they found a polite, deeply religious, English-speaking community led by a charismatic old man. The British public ate up the story of the reformed sinner. They gave the island official recognition. They sent supplies. They sent stamps. They legitimized the cult. But trauma, especially trauma built on a foundation of murder, rape, and extreme isolation, does not just vanish because you build a church over the bloodstains. It seeps into the soil. It infects the bloodline. Generation after generation, the people of Pitcairn married each other, bred with each other, and kept their dark secrets locked away from the rest of the world. The island modernized. They got the internet. They got clinics. They got a legal system. But the psychological rot at the core of their society never left. The devastating truth finally exploded in 2004. The modern world finally looked closely at the descendants of John Adams. The population of the island had dwindled to roughly 50 people. Out of those 50, there were barely 20 adult men, and out of those men, 7 were arrested and charged with a staggering 55 counts of horrifying sexual crimes, primarily involving the systemic, generational abuse of young girls. This wasn't a lone predator acting in the shadows. This was a normalized, systemic nightmare. The men arrested were not outcasts. One of them was the island's mayor. Another was the island's supreme magistrate, the very judge supposed to uphold the law. The men who controlled the island were the monsters hunting its children. The British government had to build a specialized prison on the island just to house the convicted leadership. But the deepest, most sickening irony occurred years later. A man named Mike Warren was elected as the new mayor. He explicitly campaigned on the promise of protecting children and reforming the island's image. In 2010, international police raided his office and found his computer loaded with thousands of horrific, illegal images of child exploitation. The man tasked with saving the children was just another symptom of the island's incurable disease. Today, Pitcairn Island still exists. It has a population of around 50 people. They sell honey. They sell postage stamps to tourists online. And they desperately try to market themselves as an untouched Pacific paradise. But places have memories. The soil of Pitcairn is soaked in the blood of the Polynesians who starved. It is soaked in the blood of the mutineers who slaughtered each other. It is stained by the tears of generations of women and children who lived their entire lives trapped on a rock with monsters they had to call father, brother, and mayor. We fear the dark because of what might be hiding in it. But the terrifying truth of Pitcairn Island is this. When you take a group of human beings, lock them away from the world, and remove all the consequences of civilization, the monsters don't come from the dark forest. They come from inside us. Let me know in the dark corners of the comments below. Do you believe human beings are inherently good and only corrupted by society? Or is society the only fragile cage keeping our true, monstrous nature locked away? I will be watching. Until next time, stay safe in the dark.